I must admit, I'm coming in hot from a school run, so I'm kind of like landed in my seat and like just checking what I'm supposed to be doing. But good morning, everyone. Welcome to this really exciting event for the launch of a new book around employer engagement and effective labour activation practices from various different places around the world, which I won't steal the thunder of those people who are going to talk about them. But first of all, if it's okay to say this, I'd like to congratulate Professor Ingold and I think it's Professor McGurk, Patrick and Joe, let's call them Patrick and Joe, on their new book. And what hopefully is going to be a really important piece of research, evidence, and hopefully something which we can build on for more effective employer engagement for employment and skills programs around the world, I would hope. So I'll really quickly tell you who we've got speaking today, and then I'll pass over to Jo, who will tell me what I've forgotten, and then she'll do her introduction as well. So, yes, in a moment we're gonna hear from Jo Ingold, and then Jo and I are going to be talking about a chapter of the book that we worked together on. I won't go through all the titles of those. We've got Dr. Tanja Dall from Denmark, and she's going to be talking about a chapter that she's worked on. I'm hoping we've got everyone who's on the list, so Joe will correct me, but I'm hoping we've got Professor Jeffrey Moore from Anderson University, or potentially we've got a video. We've got a video somewhere. I think we've got apologies from Andrew in Australia. Is that the text you sent me just a little while ago, Joe?
That's right, Tony. Andrew's ended up in a terrible connectivity area up in Queensland, I think. So he sends his profuse apologies.
Okay. And then we've got Patrick McGurk, who's going to tell us about the final chapter, and then I'm hoping we've got a little chance for a bit of a Q&A. Is that how you wanted to do it, Joe? So I know Joe's already done the kind of physical book launch in Australia, but Joe, I'd like to hand over to you, and perhaps you could give us an introduction to your new book.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Tony. Wonderful to be here. I'm beaming in from Australia. I'd just like to pay my respects to the elders of the Kulin Nation. I'm on beautiful Wurundjeri lands this evening. So yeah, great to be here, and I'll cover a bit about Andrew's section. We have got a video from Jeffrey as well, and yeah, I'm just going to firstly talk about the motivations and and give a broad overview of the book. And I have to say that the launch in Melbourne was actually a pre-launch because Tanja and colleagues were over from Denmark, so it was a bit of a teaser kind of event in Melbourne, in the central business district. So the book actually wasn't out then. I didn't have the physical copy in my hands that I have now. So but it's really exciting, and thank you to ERSA for all your support along this journey focused on employer engagement. That Tony and I have been on this journey for quite a number of years now, and the Employer Engagement Forum, which is hosting this launch, has been a big part of that. So thank you to ERSA for supporting the setup of this forum and also supporting the launch. And I'll be reminding everyone at the end that there is an exclusive code for 50% off the book, and I will remember that at the end as well. So firstly, how did this book come about? Well, I've been working around employer engagement for about a decade, and over time there's been an international network of scholars that has formed around the topic, because it's still, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a niche topic within employment services and active labour market programmes and policies, astonishing as that may seem. And that's something that Tony and I have been banging on on about for a long time, including at this forum where we've got a fabulous community of practice around this exact topic. So a number of us came together. We did conference special sessions. We did a special issue of an academic journal in 2017, and people kept saying someone should really write a book about this, and I kept saying, yeah, they really, really should. And then eventually I decided to tentatively put up my hand and said I'd do it if I could find a willing co-editor. And indeed, I'm really grateful to Patrick McGurk for agreeing to be co-editor, because it would not have been possible without you, Patrick. I couldn't have embarked on this journey alone. And as Patrick knows, it was a project that started during the early months of the pandemic and actually accompanied my emigration to Australia. In 2020, Patrick and I drew up a wish list of contributors, and to our absolute delight, they all said yes. And what we think and hope we've done is we produce what will be a go-to resource for anyone wanting to know about employee engagement in active labour market policies and programmes and employment services. And with our wish list, what we did was we focused on who are the key people who are writing about this topic, and it's not just about us, but we've marshalled over 20 contributors who've produced, or together we've produced something I'm really proud of, and that I think will be I hope will be a useful resource, as I mentioned. And at this point, I want to sincerely thank Paul Stevens, who's the business editor at Bristol University Press, and his team, and also Dawn Preston from New Gen Publishing for what was a really pretty painless production process. And of course, sincerely want to thank all of the contributors, and we have some of them represented this evening. So firstly, the book, what is it about? It's about employee engagement. It is the first book ever on the topic of employee engagement in active labour market programmes and policies. There is a book that's about employee engagement in education, which was published some years ago, and we sort of took inspiration from that. The book is very much aimed at a mixed audience of researchers, policymakers and practitioners, and it's fantastic to be at a forum like this to share some of what we've done with practitioners and experts. So the book has 3 parts to it. There's macro, meso and micro levels. So it's split into these 3 sections. So at the macro level, we talk about institutional and governance aspects. So basically the level of policy design and commissioning of services. At the meso level, we talk about delivery of services by providers such are represented here today. And then at the micro level, we drill right down into workplaces, and there are some really nice examples of those micro level studies. And in each of those 3 sections, there is, and this was really important to us, there is a practice case study written by or with a practitioner or an employer. So as well as the kind of academic content, which is packaged, we hope, for a more general audience as well, there's also those practice case studies. So Andrew, who couldn't be with us this evening, has written one of them, and Tony and myself with 2 other co-authors, Orla Baker and Emma Crichton, have written another practice case study chapter. And then Jeff, who we'll hear via video this evening, has written a chapter with Sephora, Vice President of Sephora in the US, with his colleague Bill Hansen as well. So tonight, what we're hoping to do is just, or this morning for you, sorry, is to hear a flavour of the international comparisons in the book, because it is very focused on the international landscape. The book covers the UK, Australia, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands and the US. So we hope that this evening you get a bit of a flavour of that, and also there will be time for questions as well. So I'm going to hand back to Tony for now, and Tony, shall Tanja, how are you fixed for timing? Because Tony and I were billed to talk about our chapter first, but are you okay to stay on the line while and then we'll move to you, and then at some point I need to work out how to play the video from Jeffrey in the US, but I will sort that out shortly.
That's all sounds good by me.
Great, thank you. So Tony, shall we provide some reflections on our chapter?
Yeah, let's do it. But I would suggest, seeing as you are the main contributor, you should be you set it out, and then I'll steal in for some glory.
Excellent. So sounds good, Tony. So with the chapter, which is, I believe, chapter 5 on collaboration and coopetition in employment services, what we present is a comparison of UK and Australian initiatives, from very much the starting point that in both countries both countries are distinctive in having for a long time had a contracted out model of employment services delivery, and with that comes pretty intense competition amongst providers. And something that we've noted over the years and came out in some of my early research was the opportunities that arise for collaboration amongst providers in order to better service employers. And what I've found was that where providers do join forces, they are better able to meet employers' requirements than if they go it alone. It was really great timing when we, because many of you will probably know about the REACT partnership led by Jane Mansour, who is on the call. So we took inspiration from the work of Jane and Tony Wilson in the IES, and really Institute of Employment Studies as well, both. And we tracked back exactly what the trajectory was in terms of the attempts to collaborate in the UK. So that began. There was a number of initiatives at the time of the work programme. Many people remember Transport for London example. So these kind of provider-led initiatives that came about, and what we really wanted to look at was what we say in the chapter is what is the potential for collaboration and also coopetition, collaboration amidst a very competitive landscape. And then we contrast that with a project that Assuria in Australia have delivered in the last couple of years, which was part of the local jobs programme initiatives, which initially launched in just a couple of areas and then diffused to all the employment regions in Australia. And that was basically, the local jobs programme was focused on having demand-led initiatives in areas where led by providers in areas where they didn't actually currently deliver. So providers who were delivering the local jobs programme had to collaborate with those who had the caseload. So we felt that there were really strong echoes from earlier attempts to promote collaboration or coopetition in the UK. So we draw the trajectory across both, and we conclude that with the REACT partnership, and also the sort of, I guess what we observed was this incremental journey towards collaboration and coopetition that has led to the REACT partnership amongst restart providers, and actually what we think are really good principles, which I'm also feeding into the Workforce Australia inquiry here in Australia, good principles of how we could overcome some of the challenges that
that pose barriers to employer engagement and collaboration across providers. So things like having agreed minimum standards for engaging with and servicing employers, having vacancy sharing protocols. Something that's talked about quite a lot here in Australia is how we manage performance frameworks if we've got providers collaborating, because many years ago providers could share out outcome payments. So we think in short that there are lessons that Australia could learn from the journey of the UK, because Australia is arguably even more competitive than the UK sector at this time. But we hope what we provide is a really nice case study of both countries, with some observations that we hope will contribute to the continuing conversations around this topic. Tony, I hope that was a fair summary, and over to you.
Yeah, was good, Joe. And just to build on what you've said already, one of the things that I think comes through with the chapter that we've written here does talk about that provider collaboration. As you talked about, the word incremental is what you use, and I think that's right in terms of how we've seen a journey of collaboration certainly amongst the provider community over time. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because from a commissioning point of view, there's not until recently, there's not necessarily been anything that's underlined or supported collaboration. So you reference, for example, historical kind of competitive contracts where you have the same provider delivering in the same area. Doesn't necessarily lend itself to collaboration for the benefit of employers, and therefore for the benefit of program participants. But what Joe and I have observed, and it's been really great to see, has been those providers kind of stepping up and potentially actually retrofitting services around the programs that have been commissioned. And I think that's an important point to pick out here, in as much as sometimes it's that old adage of what gets measured gets done, but we've seen people going a bit beyond the minimum standards of their program because they see the benefit. I would also reflect that what was interesting about the Restart program, and partly where React came from, was this push by the department to foster collaboration amongst the main providers. Now that, I think, is a really good thing, and I think Jane and her colleagues and the prime providers amongst the React partnership have done a great job there in terms of actually taking that collaboration and pushing almost continuous improvement and best practice throughout the community of providers. This is good, but I would also say that one of the things that I think we try and get across in the chapter is the fact that this is almost in a reaction to a commissioning environment which doesn't help employers, right? So if I talk about the UK context, we've got thousands of employability providers, all with siloed caseloads, and even within providers you have advisors who have their own caseloads as well. And if an employer in a particular travel to work area or a particular micro labour market wants to engage with the people on these programs, they often have to do that via scores of different providers in the area offering different services with not joined up systems, and we think it's just quite a clunky environment for an employer to engage with. So just to really finish and add to what Joe said, I think we make the point within the chapter that actually we would like to see major employers as greater stakeholders in the certainly within the commissioning of these programs, because they are ultimately the end user of the services that are provided, and where our our participants or beneficiaries end up. So why aren't they consulted about what's going to work best for them in terms of talent acquisition, the skills that they need for the future, making programs fit with the actual labour demand? And I think that's hopefully this book will provide a bit of a platform to build on that, and we'll have more of the commissioners stepping towards this conversation. That's all I wanted to say.
Wonderful, thanks, Tony. And hopefully we'll also have that's food for thought as we go through the launch, and then we can pick up questions and thoughts about that later on in the session. So now I'm going to move to our guest representing the Danish team. So over to Tanja to talk about your chapter on the employer engagement at the street level of employment services based on the fantastic research you're doing.
Well, thank you, Joe. I just want to bring up some PowerPoints here.
So,
I think they're on the way. Just right, there you are. I hope
so.
you can see them now. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
So great. So thank you, Joe, and also Patrick for including us in the book. It's a really exciting volume, and it's also really exciting to be here today with so many people who are interested in this topic of employer engagement, which I think, like on a day-to-day basis in our setting, we don't. There's not a lot of research colleagues who are sort of interested in this topic, so that's really exciting to see all of your faces here today and to be part of this sort of book. So my name is Tanja Dall. I'm an associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark. And I'm presenting today on behalf of Professor Flemming Larsen and postdoc Mikkel Madsen and myself, who wrote this chapter titled Opening the Black Box, Promoting Employer Engagement at the Street Level of Employment Services. And so this book chapter is based in our research into employer engagement. And this particular research takes place as part of a larger research effort looking into public employment services in Denmark. So in Denmark, the employer engagement efforts are sort of rooted in the public employment services. And I'll say a little bit about the Danish context in a minute. The analysis that we present or that we built this chapter on is qualitative data from 5 Danish municipalities, and there's 98 municipalities in Denmark in total, just to give you a little bit an idea of the scale here. So we work with interviews with the employer engagement staffs, job consultants, we call them in the Danish context, who are public employees. We have interviews with the unemployed persons who have experience from being part of these employer engagement efforts. And we do ethnographic observations where we follow the employer engagement staff in their sort of day-to-day work, in their meetings with clients as well as employers, follow-up meetings in the local workplaces, and so on. And we've just started also including the interviews with employers in our sort of research data, but they're not part of the analysis of this book so far, but we're really excited to get that sort of perspective included as well. So our work is mostly focused on persons who are unemployed and who also have challenges related to physical or mental health or who has social problems. So it's disadvantaged clients, we would say, as part of the public employment services. And as I said, the setting here is sort of the Danish welfare state. As some of you may know, we have a quite large, well-developed welfare state that has quite high expenditures on the public active labor market policy efforts. There we are. So the policy trends over the last 1 or 2 decades have seen policymakers looking towards employers for them to have a much more active role in transitioning disadvantaged unemployed clients into the labor market. So as policymakers at the national level have given municipalities financial incentives to place clients in these placements with local employers, municipalities have also really prioritized this work quite heavily. So we've seen this push for almost all groups of the public employment services, even the most disadvantaged, quite vulnerable individuals, to be placed and trained in local workplaces. And it's important to understand that in the Danish context, employers are not obliged make the slides bigger. How do I do that, Joe?
So I'm not entirely sure. Anyone else? Technical
if anyone can do it while I speak, you're very welcome to do so. I don't think I'm able to do anything else here.
I mean, they seem, I can see them
Okay.
fairly clearly, but I can see the text. So I think if anyone's got any suggestions, put it in the
sorry,
chat.
I'm happy to share them afterwards. I'm not able. My technical abilities don't allow me to fix any problems right now. I'm sorry about that. So okay, there's a lot of good tips in the chat function. I hope you work it out. So as I was saying about the Danish context here, employers are not obliged in any way to take on these disadvantaged groups in placements or in other types of sort of arrangements. So the responsibility for work inclusion for unemployed individuals, including the most disadvantaged people, really lies with the public employment services. And employer engagement is based on the voluntary cooperation of employers. So in our research, what we're looking at is how are these employer engagement professionals actually working with both clients and employers as they try to negotiate these training placements, but also try, of course, to develop these training placements into actual sustainable employment for these groups of unemployed persons. And so what we find is that employer engagement is taking place in these ongoing processes that takes place around individual clients, but also is being built up over time as job consultants work with the same employers or the same workplaces around different unemployed persons. So the model here is from our book chapter, and we also draw on existing research on supported employment, who has sort of similar ideas of how employer engagement sort of takes place. So what the model is supposed to show is that establishing contact with a motivated employer is really only the first step in this sort of very processual work of developing collaborative relations that engage employers in the development of both the abilities of the unemployed client, but also in the sort of inclusive capacity of the workplace. So the model could also continue. It sort of ends with clients being hired here, but really there could be an effort continuing after that, as some of the more disadvantaged clients may have recurrent needs for support from the public employment services. And of course, in sort of real life processes, employee engagement never looks as neat and linear as it does on the model here. These are dynamic processes. They go back and forth. They may break down. There will be challenges. They'll restart and so on. But the idea here is that it's really not like one point of contact. That's not really employee engagement. It's this whole process of developing placements and employment for these disadvantaged groups. So I've brought one quote here from one of the job consultants that we interviewed, and it's quite long, so I'll just read the second paragraph. And then when you've had that success a couple of times, you can take the liberty of calling the company and say, you know what, I have given you some really good candidates a lot of times, and I actually found you a good employee that you hired, stuff like that. After some time, I can say, you know what, now you have to help me out. I have someone who needs immediate activation, and all I can tell you is, I do not know what I'm bringing you. Can't you help me out here? And often you do help each other out in these situations. It's about having these good relations and collaborations. They can solve some of our challenges sometimes. So the quote here from this professional sort of illustrates both that process, building engagement, collaboration over time across several different sort of unemployed individuals. It also illustrates the importance of building relations with employers, working relationships, in order to secure these ongoing collaborations. And often it's these sort of personal relations that allow the employer engagement professionals to make demands of employers, even though the employer's participation is based on their voluntary collaboration. So it's the relationship, it's the ongoing sort of history together that sort of become a leverage in trying to engage more heavily or more what we say, like more extended collaborations from these employers. That could be about making room for the more disadvantaged clients that need more time before they can be sort of an actual contributing force of labor at the workplace. But it could also be about paying people a partial wage, if not fully employing them at some point when they've sort of finished a training program. In the quote here, it's about a client who is in for immediate activation. They're often the least motivated group. They've been told you have to be here, otherwise we cut your sort of public benefit. So there's different types of sort of unattractive or more sort of challenging placements that you'd want to sort of engage clients on. And so what we see is that employee engagement is highly relational work. Job consultants develop these relations both to clients but also to employers. But they also work with building relations between clients and employers. So, for instance, they might educate employers on the specific sort of conditions or challenges about the client that may make the client sort of seem differently, react differently to their other employees. And they might also educate the clients on how do you sort of behave and act when you're part of a workplace. What will be expected of you in this setting? What does it mean when your employer says so or asks you to do this and that? So job consultants may also sort of mediate or try to resolve conflicts or misunderstandings that happen between some of these clients who haven't been part of the labor market, some of them for 10, 15, 20 years perhaps, and employers who may not have experience dealing with people who have autism or any kind of other sort of challenge in a work setting. So employee engagement is also relational in the sense that finding the right match between the unemployed person and a given place of work, it's also often about matching the right people to each other. So it's not just about sort of matching the skills or experiences of the unemployed person to the functions of the workplace. For the most vulnerable or disadvantaged clients, it's also really about matching the right persons to each other. So I brought another quote here from another job consultants, and they say about it. For instance, I may know that this employer is very calm and quiet, and then I have this young guy with ADHD who wants to be a carpenter, and he should definitely go out to this other employer who can keep him on a tight leash, activate him, but also give him some boundaries. You learn along the way what the different employers are good at. What type of unemployed people are they good at? And that is not something that is written down anywhere. That's just something that we know. So I think this quote, we have a lot of quotes that are sort of similar to this, which is really sort of interesting about sort of the knowledge, quite personal knowledge that these consultants would need to have of the local employers, of the local workplaces that they work with. And so my very last point for today is that employer engagement, of course, is contextual, takes place in contexts. So it is the context of the unemployed person, their resources, their challenges, social situation, family life, geography, and so on. It's the context of the specific workplace, the functions, the rhythms of work, the social environment, workplace culture, so on. There's an endless list to that as well. And of course, it's the context of the active labor market policies who offer certain resources that will support this work, but also puts in place certain limitations of what is actually possible to achieve within this framework. So all of these contexts influence each other, influence employee engagement. So that or they all have to be taken into account when job consultants are trying to engage employers around placements that really have a potential to turn into sustainable employment, like down the road. So for some clients, these placements would be like a few weeks and then they could go into ordinary employment. For some of the most disadvantaged clients, these placements could be years, or sort of developing the client's capacities, but also in developing the capacity for inclusion at the workplace. So in conclusion, what we see is that employee engagement aimed at promoting labor market participation for disadvantaged groups includes the sustained involvement of developing both the individuals and the workplace's capacities. And really developing that sort of potential match, that first sort of context into an actual day-to-day match in a specific workplace setting with this specific clients and their resources and challenges that they may have. So in this sense, we say that employer engagement as that first point of contact, it really isn't the end goal in itself. Employer engagement sort of becomes a backdrop against which the capacities of the unemployed person and of the workplace is developed over time. So understanding employer engagement as being relational, contextual processes also underscores the need for employers to actively commit to these sometimes quite prolonged processes over time. And some employers are just mainly motivating in having like productive free labor right now in a more of a short-term sort of perspective. They may not be motivated for this sort of reciprocal relational engagement. Nevertheless, the Danish case does illustrate that it is possible to engage employers on a voluntary basis. We also see that it does take considerable skill and effort and resources of the employer engagement professionals, but also of the public employment service system in this case. There's a lot of resources put into this work in the Danish case as well. So that's all that I'm going to share with you today. Thank you so much. I hope you worked out the challenge with the slides here, and hopefully they're back down now. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much, Tanja. And I think I've realised that I've lost the chat again. I couldn't see it when we first started this morning, and I think I must be missing whatever's going on in the chat. So thank you, and apologies for the visibility issue. And yeah, it's being recorded, and yeah, great that you're happy to share the slides afterwards. I'm now going to attempt to share the video from Jeffrey Moore in the US, because it would be the middle of the night for Jeffrey and William. Jeff pre-recorded a video for us, which runs for about 10 minutes. He said I could edit it down, but I think it's just so worth listening to because Jeff and Bill have co-authored 2 chapters in the book based on their work. Sorry, I've got pinging. My phone's trying to be too clever. I've tried to shut everything down. They co-authored, contributed 2 chapters to the book in the 3rd section, which is the micro level of workplaces. And sorry, I should have said that Tanja and colleagues contributed a chapter which was the meso level of employer engagement. I'm just going to check that I'm right. Yes, I am right in that. And Bill and Jeff have got these 2 chapters based on their work that they've done about the about Sephora and Walgreens journey to employing more people with disabilities. So one chapter talks about the role of leadership and in employee engagement, and the practice case study chapter is, as I mentioned earlier, co-authored with Vice President of Sephora, which is more detail about the journey that they went on, which I think is really, your chapter is opening the black box, Tanja, and I think what we attempt to do in this book in many ways is open the black box, and that black box of what employers need to do to change their practices is also one of the important aspects to look at. So I'm going to attempt to share and see whether this works now.
Good morning. It's my joy.
No, I don't think that worked.
Not the audio.
You heard the audio. That was thanks to Pat telling me which bit of input and output of my audio. Right. I'm going to attempt to share again, and this time.
To join you for the launch of the book, Employer Engagement, Making Active Labor Market Policies Work. And my name's Jeff Moore, and I have the pleasure of participating in 2 chapters of this book. And in particular, we're sharing our experience of working with Walgreens for the past 10 years in the United States and Sephora for the past 6 years. And in particular, in this book, we talk about Sephora, where we interviewed 5 of their distribution centers with about 2,000 employees. And particularly, we've honed in.
I think we've lost the audio, Joe. Can anyone else hear that?
Is it back?
Yes, tokenism. This is really in-depth look at what it looks like to change the culture of an organization. The first of the 2 questions I'd like to answer today is, what are the key benefits of employing somebody with a disability? And from the Sephora data, managers, we interviewed the managers, we interviewed the co-workers, we interviewed the people with disabilities as well. But the managers in particular said that there were 5 key benefits. The first one is they said that their members with disabilities had great strengths. So these strengths were in particular great performance. So they were strong performers. It was important that they would have the same work expectations as other people without a disability, and that they would have the same respect and the same pay. The other benefit that they highlighted was preventative input. Many of these disabilities, these individuals were tuned into details, and they were telling the managers ahead of time before a machine would break, because they could hear the sound of the machine changing, and maybe a ball bearing was going out. And so there was a lot of preventative input. And then another huge benefit was positive attitudes. No drama, individuals really wanting to come to work, and they were happy to be at work, and they were happy every day coming to work. And so that was a positive. The last one that they talked about was innovation. And these innovations would come up because of adaptation. So, for example, in one of the distribution centers, having a keyboard, and all the stations at a certain part of the department had keyboards to log in different things. But because of some of the disabilities that came into that department, they changed how the process worked and got rid of the keyboard and put buttons. So instead of just doing that for the 1 or 2 stations with people with disabilities, they did that for the whole department. That really improved performance for everybody. So if it's improving processes or visual aids or visual management, those innovations internally really helped the So those are the things, the benefits that managers said. The other ones that we pulled out were about changing the team. So the inclusion really changed team dynamics. In particular, 3 things came out. One was enabling to find the best fit. So here, a lot of times in the performance, often the employees with disabilities would be at like 200% of performance. And so the non-disabled team members were very happy about that, because they were holding up part of the team. Or if they had a bad day, team members would be, with a disability, would be carrying the team. So the best fit was having people help each other out. So non-members would help if there was a change in processes. They would help train. And it, typically, what they were telling us is that people with disability have longer time to learn new processes. So there was this assistance, or this hands of those who were helping were the non-disabled team members that were helping the disabled team members get up to speed and then be able to be part of the team. So there was kind of a self-organizing part of the team that was very helpful. The other one was less accidents in the workplace. So we saw that teams work safer. People with disabilities stuck to the training standard operating procedures and the training. And so those things went well. Also, they were quicker to notice possible safety, not violations, but issues that were coming up, small little things. And so that really helped decrease accidents and increase safety in the workplace. And then finally, the supportive connection between the team members really helped their departments outperform other departments. And what we found is the productivity of different teams that had employees with disabilities were a lot higher than those without disabilities. And so we also found that across distribution centers. And so those were the things that the manager said. Those also were some of the things about team dynamics. My personal observation in some of the questions that we had is that pro-social behavior really was increased in all the employees. And so these were managers, employees without disability. They all talked about changing their attitudes. So many of them had biases or negative stigmas, and those things were abandoned once they had this personal relationship in the workplace. And so that authentic relationship between employee one to another and manager to employee really helped to create stronger relationships. And those pro-social behaviors in the workplace also translated to outside in the community, where employers or employees would say, when previously of being in an inclusive team, if they met somebody with a disability on the street, they would just ignore that person and kind of go their own way without saying anything. Now, when they meet somebody with a disability in public, they go over and say hello and wish them a good day and talk to them and give them the respect they would give anybody else. And so that pro-social behavior really is quite important. Finally, the last question I'd like to just encourage you with is how can employers work with community partners to gain these benefits? And it's not a very difficult problem to solve. You have to go find different organizations, different stakeholders in the community that are servicing the different disabilities. And so when you find these partners, you create these bridges between them, either if it's in the high schools or if it's in nonprofits or government associations. You go find those. Now, Sephora and Walgreens have created in their own organization a type of training center. And so that's where they get these community partners to be trained, and then they ask them to find potential employees to come and work with them. And they've created this, what they call a transitional work group, and it's a 9-week program where in partnership with community partners, they bring in possible candidates. And so those things really create a path to employ individuals or people with disabilities and continue to have a strong, inclusive organization. Thank you very much, and I hope the rest of your conference goes well. God bless you. Bye. Morning.
So I'm running it again in case anyone missed it the first time. Sorry. Yeah, Professor Jeffrey Moore from Anderson University, and I realised that I neglected to say, because I think that everyone's obsessed with skincare and makeup like me, that in case you didn't know, Sephora, it actually recently launched in the UK, but it's a US brand, part of the LVMH luxury brand family, and of course what Walgreens is a chemist chain in the UK. So hope with these wonderful contributions you're getting to a good sense of what the book actually offers. It's because it does offer a very a wide range of contributions. And I'll also add that although Andrew couldn't be here, Andrew's chapter is focused on Australia, and it's about connecting employee and employer engagement. I remember when I first started studying employer engagement, and I had to keep explaining to people that it was employer engagement, not employee engagement. But Andrew, and I think Jeffrey's example, have illustrated the connections between the two. So our final speaker is my wonderful co-editor, Dr. Patrick McGurk from Queen Mary University London, who's going to provide some insights on the book, and in particular the final chapter, but that will hopefully whet your appetite in terms of actually buying the book for what is a very modest price, which we'll talk about shortly. Over to you, Patrick.
I think you're muted, Patrick.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Tony. So yes, absolutely, Joe. When I first started talking to colleagues about what I was working on in terms of employer engagement, I constantly had to explain it was different to employee engagement, and particularly colleagues in human resource management immediately understood what employee engagement was. But employer engagement was a whole new thing. But it's great to see so many practitioners on the call this morning, and thank you very much for coming and helping us launch and celebrate this important new book. When we first put the proposal to the publishers, and the publishers sent it out for review, it sent the proposal out for review to get soundings from experts. One of the things that a reviewer said in coming back was, please let the conclusion not just be a summary of, you know, all the chapters that preceded it. And Joe and I said, of course, you know, we will do a kind of substantive conclusion. It won't be just a sort of rehash of all the arguments in the book. But of course, it was much more difficult than we expected to pull the general lessons together. And we would love to say that our conclusion provides the sort of definitive answer to academics and to practitioners alike, you know, about how we make this stuff work, how we make active labour market policies work. And that's not just in employment services, but there's also a chapter on education in the book as well, on further and higher education, and about how universities and colleges work with employers as well. And we would love to say, oh, you know, we've got all of the lessons now, we're going to pull them all together and have a kind of magic bullet answer. But of course, it's much more complicated than that. And although we tried to rise to the challenge of what the reviewer put to us in terms of, you know, make a substantive contribution out of your conclusion, what we arrived at was not a set of general lessons, but we think we have identified at the different levels that Joe spoke about, the macro, meso and micro levels, we think we have been able to identify some key characteristics of what makes up for a successful employer engagement, with lots and lots of caveats about international differences and differences across sectors and differences across employers in terms of size in particular, and whether they have well-developed HR departments and that kind of thing. All of these caveats aside, we've come up with a list of points that we think is quite useful in terms of presenting some characteristics. So we set out the main actors, as Joe was saying earlier on, at the three different levels, the main levels at which we can view employer engagement, the sort of national government level, the sort of intermediate level where the employment services and colleges and universities and so on are, and then at the micro level of the individual organization, the individual employer, and the individual partnership organizations. So what we've come up with at macro level is that very much taken from Joe's introductory chapter with Rick van Berkel and with Thomas Bredgaard, this blend of policy sticks, carrots, and sermons. You can't beat employers over the head with a stick and tell them to engage. You can't only rely on carrots either, and you can't only rely on sermonizing and appealing to their better interests, if you like, and their values. You need a blend of all three. It seems to be the lesson from across the different country case studies that we looked at. Social partnerships work best when they're institutionalized. So when social partnerships are left to purely voluntary arrangements like they tend to be in the UK and the US, that doesn't tend to work as strongly as it would, say, in Denmark, where social partnerships are more institutionalized, and in Northern Europe generally they tend to be more institutionalized and more embedded in institutions. Nonetheless, there is a certain amount, as Tanja was saying, there's a certain amount of voluntary agreement that has to take place, and inside the black box there's lots of things that cannot be institutionalized or regulated. Regional and local devolution seems to be a theme. It seems to work best when devolved to local level. And generally speaking, where there's a societal concern with the quality of working life, there's a chapter in the book about job quality, for example, and that appears to be very important as part of the sort of values-driven side of employer engagement, where generally speaking, stakeholders in a society or in a country have a level of concern with the quality of working life. At the meso level, simplicity, as has already been said, if it's kept simple for employers and for providers, I mean, we're very good at sort of working our way through all the complexity, I think, and then presenting it back to partners. I mean, as practitioners, I think we're very good at finding our way through the sort of regulatory complexity and mess, and presenting things in a simpler way, but it changes so often that stakeholders become understandably bewildered by all of the different changes and regulations and technical issues and so on in delivery. But simplicity tends to be the key for it to be most effective. And where intermediaries can offer a more holistic service to employers, that also seems to work best. So where there's a focus on both recruitment and retention, and where the intermediary has something of an expertise in the sector that they're dealing in, and that the employer is in, it has some expertise around that sector and around that market. Co-production models, partnership models, it sounds obvious, tend to work better than purely market-based models, for example, where you have individualistic competition going on. And what we also learn from some countries is that occupational career ladders are also very helpful for job progression, in work progression, because obviously people can develop over time and stay with a particular employer in a particular sector, and they can work their way up a particular career. But many, as we know, many careers lack these ladders now, and lack these opportunities for progression. Where they've been introduced, that seems to help, or where they've been reintroduced, that seems to help. I'm thinking care work, even retail, where some of these ladders are being brought back in to an extent. And then at the level of the individual company or organization or employer, as Jeff was just speaking about on the video, it's very much about having a values-led approach by the leadership and by the human resource managers of the organization that sort of trickles down or spills over, if you like, to the line management and the operational management in an organization. It needs to be values driven. It needs to be inclusive in its approach. There needs to be a belief that including all employees from all different types of backgrounds, is a virtue in itself and is good for the organisation in itself. That seems to be very important. And the final point there is really about working with the community and working with community partners where there's a shared sense locally that social outcomes need to be striven for together rather than individually. So I'm going to stop there. I've probably gone on way too long, for which apologies, but I can share these slides later on if colleagues would like them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. That was a fantastic summary and really points to all the different dimensions that I think we've managed to cover in the book, even if it's not the final word, but it's definitely a significant primer, I think, on the issues. And so I look forward to colleagues' thoughts about that. I'm about to press the post button for the exclusive discount code, and it is exclusive, whopping 50% off. It's a bargain at hardback as well, hardback and ebook available this year, and paperback next year. But it's definitely worth investing in the hardback, and also Tony is very happy to sign copies, and Patrick as well. And that will significantly add to the value of it. So just imagine. So I'll leave that to you, Tony, to get your special signing pen ready, and Patrick as well at all the events. Without further ado, we can move on to the questions and discussion. We've got about 26 minutes, I think, for some discussion. So now's the time to dig into those. Tony, would you like to drive this?
Yeah, I'm happy to help facilitate this. What I'd like to do is invite people to either put your digital hand up, or I will just go to the chat as well, because we've got some stuff in the chat that's been put already. Adrian, if you're there, would you like to come in, because I think you've put a couple of different things that are really interesting in the chat. So Adrian Butcher, are you still on the line? Would you like to?
Yep. Yes, I'm very
Hi,
kind,
Adrian.
Yeah, a couple of points. One was in terms of seeking out employers, in particular those that have programs designed to help people that might otherwise consider to have challenges. I just don't know if it's seen much in other countries, but I'm sure people in the UK are aware of, say, Pret a Manger, who have a program called Rising Stars. And we particularly work with some neurodiverse people there, people who were considered to be would never get a job. And they, as an employer, they deliberately look to the special capabilities of, or indeed the special challenges that those people have, and give them a gentle ramp into work. I think also people in the UK will have probably seen the likes of GCHQ, which is an extremely elite organisation, and BAE Systems looking for neurodiverse people, because of the special capabilities that we have. And I met a young boy myself who, in ordinary conversation, could not function at all. Simply, you would speak and he would look at you blankly. Get him on a subject that interested him, and he was way better than me. So, that's, I think, one other thing. And just one other thing, I don't know if in the other countries they get many swaps. So, in other words, programs in the UK, I'm sure people are familiar that the employer, if you put the candidate through a particular course, the employer will guarantee an interview. And that obviously tends to be where there's a lot of employer demand in the segments. We've seen, by the way, locally, a pooled employer swap. In other words, a whole pool of employers in a sector which struggles to recruit. 10 or 12 employers. I think it's organised by actually Lewisham Council, and those employers will together say, we will give an interview to anybody that's been on this course. I just didn't know whether that was seen, that there are some cases. Just a tiny plug for Twin itself. We actually run a course for neurodiverse people, coping strategies with neurodiversity. And it's really about helping them to understand their impact, if you like, on the world, and how they might, understand that and adapt their behaviours, their practices, whatever, to more closely align with the common expectations of employers. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful, but they were the thoughts that I had in particular.
Thank you, Adrian. There's a few things to pick up there. So you talked about sector-based work academy programs, individual approaches by employers, perhaps nuanced approaches for particular underrepresented groups like neurodiverse groups. Joe or Patrick or others, do you have any comments or reflections on what Adrian said?
Those are great comments. Thanks, Adrian. Actually, the SWAPs, as they're now known, I was thinking of the old acronym. It was something I was going to mention in the Workforce Australia inquiry that's happening here in Australia. It's basically a first principles review that the new government is leading through a select committee about employment services starting from base principles. And I know that's particularly something that they're interested in hearing, exactly the kind of evidence that you've just mentioned. So I was going to include that in my submission, because it's not something that is really is particularly happening here in terms of that really demand-led collaborative approach. When you mentioned Pret a Manger, the other thing that came to mind was some of programs like Marks and Star and other ones like that. So I'm glad you've mentioned those. I'm wondering whether Tanja are there any initiatives that you know of in Denmark that are kind of, so the sector-based work academies? So I guess, well, Adrian, you're probably, if you could just describe a bit for Tanja what they look like.
Yes, certainly. What I mean, Tanja, is whereby certain industries have a demand for employees, or they struggle to find them, and we provide training especially attuned to the needs of those employers. It could be quite basic training. It doesn't necessarily be basic training, by the way. So one of the things that's worked very well for us, and we've got about 90% placement, is cybersecurity boot camps. So that's by no means a base level career necessarily. It is an area of high demand, and again, it's very, very successful in placing people. So I think it is really a case of looking very hard at what the employer wants, almost regarding the employer as the centre of your world to start with, and understanding what they want, so that you can then look for A, training programs, and B, candidates that would suit those training programs to get them into work. And I think it's just a very effective joining of employers and candidates, and indeed providers.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I don't think we have like similar programs that are actual programs in the Danish setting. So I think it's a more, if you'd say, sort of a generalized, there's certain areas of work that are sort of in particular high need for workers, and then public employment services might sort of, like, they look to where are the openings in the labor market, of course. And then sometimes public employment services can be part of like financing, if you need like a driver's license for like driving the public buses, for instance. For a long time, that has been sort of a well-established sort of route, if you will, but it's not a specific program as such. But local companies, bus companies, have been saying, well, if you sort of like, if this person gets that sort of driver's license, then we'll be happy to employ them, for instance. We've seen some of that around like care work in nursing homes and so on right now. There's a big sort of demand for people in that sort of area. And then that's a collaboration with the educations in that sort of area to sort of like public employment services will sort of point people who might be interested or qualified in that direction. They get a short sort of upskilling from the educational sort of sector, and then go into the labor market. So it's not actual programs, but more perhaps the sort of idea of co-production or stuff like that. And it's not very what would you say, I don't want to say standardized, but there's not like a particular framework around how to do it and so on. I think it's more about like sector based or where the need is really on that. Yeah.
Very briefly, in the UK, by the way, I think it's possibly not always understood how much better developed vocational education is in some European countries than in the UK. In Germany, 49% of young people go through vocational colleges, you know, and it's not kind of necessarily perceived as a kind of, as we're just starting to realize, it's not a second-class citizen from going to uni. In fact, many of them do still offer routes into Univer. We're working with the German colleges now for their students, and yeah, they're very 49% of German students go through educational college. I don't know what the number is in the UK, but it feels like less than 25%.
And I learned recently in Switzerland it's 2/3, and even ministers in government have have been through vet pathways. Patrick, any insights from you from your work? I'm thinking particularly the retail case study, perhaps, or other reflections.
Only that, yeah, there's an extraordinary amount of innovation that goes on in the partnership arrangements, and you know, both within countries and across countries. You know, it's not a sort of one size fits all in any one country. That's what I was struck by. But I suppose the other thing is when you look at local level, I mean, you mentioned retail there, Joe, is the diversity of local managers and the hiring managers and how much they can differ from one branch to the next branch within the same organization. I mean, years ago when I was doing some interviews in the area, I remember interviewing somebody from Sainsbury's, and the hiring manager that I was talking to in a very large supermarket was saying, well, he was saying it was very helpful that it had come down from on high. It came down from Justin King as CEO. Any new hires that we have in this area must be from the local employability partner, local intermediary, and so on. And that was really helpful, where it comes down from the top. Where that doesn't happen, or where you've got a lone HR director or a lone corporate social responsibility manager, for example, you know, trying to sort of fly this flag in the organization against some resistance somehow, it's easily undermined by local managers who just can see the signals, and they can see, well, you know, it's kind of half important, and so some of us will do it and some of us won't. Whereas some hiring managers, if they receive a very strong message from the top that they ought to be using these services, they will comply. They may not comply very enthusiastically, but they will comply. So that was my only other observation, really, is that sort of diversity of motivations and diversity of practices at local level within the same organization, really.
Really, really important. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm going to bring Gavin in because he's had his digital hand up for a little while, so I'm sure his digital arm is quite sore. But I just very quickly just mention that Liz in the chat has just talked about it so often about relationships, and that echoes Tanya's earlier points, and also some of the work that Joe has put out previously. And it just strikes me so much about how employers themselves are bound somewhat by the kind of clunky processes and structures that they've got to work to as well, when actually when we're working with people who perhaps need a little bit more support into the workplace, we often have to have those relationships to bypass the processes which fundamentally knock people out of the hiring process. So, and suddenly an employer finds that they've got this wonderful person who would not have been successful had they gone through the online web form and the structured interview processes. But it's just so interesting, isn't it, that the structures and the processes are a barrier in themselves, and the relationships help to overcome them. Sorry, I was just sort of like wrapping up a few different points there. Gavin, I'm sorry, you've been waiting for a while. Come on in, Gavin. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, and congratulations on your book. It speaks to my heart, and as Joe and some of you may know, some of my research regarding youth development and transition, and I've worked for an organisation called Deakin, where we did employment transition and support for neurodiverse people into work, and got me really down this path of neurodiversity and youth development transition, which I've just finished a master's degree in and written a paper on. And some of my work is online through FE News about neurodiverse youth and transition. I think that what we're seeing here is a cultural challenge. I think if we speak to Drucker, Drucker spoke about management and addressing culture before we address strategy. And if we don't address the culture, then obviously, strategy will get eaten for lunch or breakfast or whatever. And I think that in the UK, we have a stratification of cultural divides and cultural expectations that are stratified, and where we are seeing organizations cross many different pathways that are coming in from different parts of the world. But in the UK, I found through my research that we're only seeing about, of the 27% people neurodiverse, only 3% actually end up in employment. And of that, only 0.8% actually influence education or employment. So it's a very small minority number. And what we're seeing, I thought, was excellent from the Twin Group and perhaps some others, where it does seem to be an educational process between employer and employee, both at the same sort of level. What we are having trouble with is the job coaches, because it's in the UK, job coaches is an interdisciplinary function. It covers psychology, education, employment, and the issues they're being pushed into spaces they're not qualified for. So we're seeing a typical Peter principle happen here, which is where people are pushed into positions where they're not qualified to do that, and then there's overreach and failure and consequent cycle of failure. So I'm not sure if anyone has any answers to that, but I do think we need to really work on the job coaches situation in the UK, particularly where it comes to neurodiversity and what that looks like. And I'm hoping your book will support that, begin to start, educate the job coaches and support job coaches and recognize that they are in a precarious position. And so are teachers. Teachers are in a very precarious position to try and support the advice and guidance in this country. And so it's a very real challenge. And I think we're not as far down the road as perhaps some other countries. Yeah. So that's all from me, and thank you for your time.
Joe or Patrick or others, have you got any, or Tanya, have you got any reflections on what Gavin said there? Tanya, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, I think thank you for your reflections, Gavin. I think it's really interesting to think about sort of the professional level of the job consultants or job coaches, or the people who are trying to sort of facilitate this sort of employer engagement. And I think it's sort of I think it's really been overlooked how complicated a role that really is, being in sort of working with employers, with sort of developing workplaces, but also working very closely with these unemployed persons or disadvantaged people who may have very particular, you talked about neurodiversity, but really, at least in the Danish context, these job consultant works with such a broad range of, what would you say, challenges. It could be physical, it could be cognitive, mental, it could also be social problems in this context. So I think that's a real sort of challenge in how specialized should these people be around specific sort of types of challenges in order to help people develop, perform best as they can, and how much do they need to sort of have a generalized, being able to work with a broad range and sort of making it feasible in any sort of program level, really. So I think it's just a really interesting question. I think we've only just sort of begun to sort of recognize sort of the complexity involved with that. And I'm not sure, I don't know of any sort of, in the Danish context, at least for a long time, the sort of main qualification was, do you have experience either from sales of being employed in the private sort of sector of the labor market, then you're qualified to do this job, right? So I think there's some real challenges and issues and a lot of work to do around that going forward. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tanja. Jonathan, did you want to come in? I know you had a hand up, but I think it's gone down. You don't have to contribute, but you're very welcome to.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be part of this, and I think this book is coming at exactly the right time, because I just joined the employer engagement team in Ingeus, and one of the things that struck me was the research that came out of the CIPD, both last summer and on their autumn 22 report, particularly in such a tight labour market, that showed that for looking to engage, recruit and retain staff at the moment, more people are doing nothing than are actually looking at the long-term unemployed. It's astonishing. Right down at the bottom of the list is that hiring managers are thinking about unemployed people, or long-term unemployed, or people claiming welfare benefits. So I think this is a really good time for this book to be coming out. One of the things I'm interested in, though, is I'm going to be coming cap in hand to you. We've just launched an initiative at Ingeus in conjunction or collaboration with a company called Codeverse to address this somewhere around the 19,000 jobs that are open in London in the IT and tech sector. And we're looking to move some of our candidates through a training program, so similar to what Adrian was talking about. But we are looking to engage employers that are coming at it from a corporate social responsibility sort of area. So we are looking to meet their tech requirements or their needs. So we're not asking for any charity. We will train the people to be what they need them to be. But we are looking or interested in meeting employers that are curious about filling those roles, but also meeting their corporate social responsibilities as well, moving people from disadvantaged backgrounds into work. So if any of you have any contacts, or you spoke about the relational importance with employers, then please do message me, and I'd be very, very interested in picking those relationships up and seeing whether we can help them and they can help us as well. So forgive me for hijacking this meeting to pitch for work, but thank you very much. I appreciated the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think you might have some people pitching to you as well to get their candidates involved in that programme as well. So hopefully we can see some collaboration amongst providers. I'm really conscious that I've no way near got to all the comments in the chat. So if anyone has got something burning that they put in the chat that I have not picked up on, will you please put your hand up, because I'm struggling to get through it all. Please put your hand up and make your point, because I'm aware we've only got a few minutes left in this session as well. Annie, well done. You took my lead.
Sorry, I'll apologise that I'm quite nervous speaking to a large group. I am still quite young in my career doing employment sort of support, and I've recently taken on the employer engagement role for a housing association based in the Northwest. You might have heard of us. I work for Taurus, and I am part of the charitable side of that. I approach a lot of local organisations within the areas that we have. And a lot of them come back to me with regards to the participants that I work with. I specifically work with those who have quite a lot of barriers into work, whether that be through neurodiversity, large gaps within employment. And I find a lot of the smaller local employers will put barriers sort of in place. I don't know whether they do it intentionally, especially for those with neurodiversity, that they don't have the support available for them to sort of host them, whether that be on a work placement or within a role. I often say to them about the things that they can access. So, for example, the access to work, for example, if they need a specific computer equipment or access to the building. But I just wondered if anybody knew of any other sort of support available, or a way in which that I could sort of gently encourage them that actually the individuals with neurodiversity are actually fantastic workforce. especially within sort of certain roles. So I was just wondering if anybody had any advice and guidance around that, because like I said, I'm still very new, so I would really appreciate any support.
So the first thing I'd say is that this is probably another hour-and-a-half conversation, but that's fine, Annie, because what I'll do, I'll get your email address from Laura, and I'll send you a few bits and pieces that I'm aware of that might be useful. But I'd also encourage you to come along to the ERSA Employer Engagement Forum, where you can start to collaborate and learn and share some. Share ideas and get some insight into other people who are working across the country with various different types of people. I mean, I'm not shutting you down at all, but I mean, if anyone wants to kind of like chuck something at Annie right now, but I know that I can send you some bits that will be hopefully useful.
I mean, that in itself would be incredible, so thank you. And yes, I'd love to join the forum, because like I said, I'm still very new. My background originally, believe it or not, is volunteering, so how I've ended up doing this is great. But you know, to learn from individuals like yourselves who may have done it for a bit longer than I have, it's really useful for me in my development, and also being able to support my participants to the best that I can, because at the end of the day, I want them to strive and you know, they can do it, and it's all about encouraging and making sure that employers know that these people are fantastic workers as well. So if you could send that would be amazing, and I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem at all. It may be that Adrian wants to come in and give you some insight, because I know he's coming from a place of experience as well. But if we take Adrian's as the last question and give Joe a minute to wrap up.
Sure, super quick. My question was really about, you mentioned really early on common standards for employer engagement. I was just interested in what kind of thing that might cover. Your last one, by the way, I've stuck my email address in the chat for our neurodiverse program, and I noticed somebody else has done something similar. So for the lady who wanted to know how to help you neurodiverse, look in the chat.
Thank
you. But again,
you.
the common standards, I was interested in what they were.
I think that was a point that Joe made early on. Is that right, Adrian?
Yeah. Yes. And I guess I know Jane had to go. She made herself late by listening to Patrick. So it's she did catch all the contributions, but Jane Mansour and also Claire Lane from Serco are probably the best people to talk to about the details of those minimum standards. But basically the idea is to kind of hide the wiring for employers, which has been very much the idea since the work programme, but also to ensure that wherever we used to talk about no wrong door when I was in government, and I said a few years ago that it was almost employers couldn't find the door to the employment and skills system. So it's what the React partnership has done, has kind of said wherever employers enter the system, they can expect an equivalent standard of service. But happy to put you in touch as well, Adrian, if you contact Tony and I afterwards. And I guess final comments, we could talk further, and we will talk further, because as Tony said, we have this regular employer engagement forum events, which are very much about collaboration, about sharing information. It's been really growing since it was set up by ERSA in 2020, and it is very much a community of practice. So feel free to come along to that to share details. And I suppose my final point was really just a few reflections. Thank you to Jonathan for sharing the CIPD snippet there, and that is really insightful. And I think that really reminded me of a key point from the book, which is the language that we use is so important, that rather than sort of saying hiring ex-welfare claimants or whatever is okay, but really it's that skill of people engaging with employers to really make the value proposition, and as you were just saying, Annie, to kind of put across those positives. It's that strength strengths-based view, not that kind of, you know, would employers like to hire people who have been portrayed in the media as feckless, but actually these are overlooked pools of talent. They're under-leveraged talent. That's very much the parlance here in Australia recently. And the second thing is also just speaking to that point about CSR, because what the evidence does show is, yes, CSR is an important driver, but as Jonathan, I think you said, it's not just about appealing to kind of charitable, altruistic perspectives from employers or values. It is also that business case, which is so important in articulating to employers that it does make sense to tap into employment services. And I think we're all concerned to just make that process easier for employers to actually to be able to engage. So those are final thoughts, but not final thoughts, if you see what I mean, to be continued. But thank you so much again, Tony, for hosting this, for collaborating, and Patrick and Tanja, and also Andrew and Jeffrey, who couldn't be here, and finally to ERSA again, to Laura, Elizabeth, for supporting us and hosting the launch. And don't forget to snag your copy at a bargain price.
Well done, Joe and Patrick. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. That is the conclusion of this session, of this book launch. See you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.